Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So, yeah, that was a pretty damn busy few days. Battle for Azeroth has been announced, and now we're a few days past that announcement, and what I want to do today is pretty much in, a more raw, unscripted fashion, go through my thoughts on the expansion, and my thoughts on the reaction to this expansion, because one of the things that is a little bit more interesting for me is there has been a lot of pushback to the theme. Now, I don't want to overblow the size of that pushback. I think most people do seem quite excited either by the story or the content. Some people are excited by both, some are excited by neither, but it has been interesting. And this is something that I'd sort of been tracking for a while. I brought up the idea of me personally really liking the idea of the Alliance and the Horde fighting again back in the summer, and that was something that some people thought was a really good idea, and other people thought was a less good idea, and that really has been sort of core to the response to this expansion. But what's interesting about it is, while we did get that massive big cinematic of the two sides clashing and all of that stuff, when we actually think about the content of this expansion, is it really as solely Alliance and Horde as you may think? Because if you think about it, right, when we're going through a lot of this new content, you're exploring Titan facilities. There seems to be a lot of old god-styled corruption going around the place. They confirmed that Ashara is going to be a raid boss in this expansion. So, while their initial marketing push, which is obviously something that's going to be drumming up on the more sort of emotionally held beliefs, I would say, something that people will resonate with, such as the faction that they play in-game, while that is the case for the marketing, I think it's quite likely that the actual expansion itself will feel a lot more varied in terms of its themes than maybe you'd initially think by just seeing Battle for Azeroth and thinking, oh, was this like a weird PvP expansion? Now, narratively, the idea of the two sides clashing is a bit of a funky one if you think about it in a few ways. One thing that is important, though, is the Alliance and the Horde after the Broken Shore are not particularly good friends. They don't really help out that much when we actually get into the later content of Legion. That's player characters basically saying, screw you guys, you're useless, we're going to band together and get the job done. Now, the thing there is, our player characters are still going to be operating in that capacity in this expansion. So Magni recruits us, and we get our Heart of Azeroth, which is like your new artifact-style progression, and I'll be talking about the mechanics a little bit more, later on in this video, but I want to cover, like, the story and the theme first. But our characters are going to be engaging in that, so then it's a question of, if your main character, like if you are engaging with Magni in the Heart of Azeroth, and you are also exploring Titan ruins, getting to the bottom of old god secrets, you've got to wonder how much of the expansion actually will literally be Horde versus Alliance. Of course, we will have to see, and we do know that there is the War campaign, which is something that will take place as you level up. Basically, it seems to be kind of like not the Garrison campaign, well, perhaps the Garrison campaign, but also a bit like your Legion Order Hall campaigns, just that it happens while you're leveling up. It might happen once you hit max level, but it's supposed to tell the story of that war. Now, insofar as the war itself, so yeah, as I said, the two sides, not particularly great friends. Now, while player characters know what was up with the Broken Shore, it was all a setup by Mephistroth, really, when the SI7 guys found out about it, but, shenanigans happened in the Rogue Class Order Hall campaign. But from the Alliance perspective, the Horde just sort of up and left. So it does make sense for there to be animosity. The thing is, we don't really know how this war sparks off. It seems to have been the case that the burning of Teldrassil does happen before the whole Undercity siege. However, we do not know exactly how that goes down. There is an entire novel which is supposed to actually cover that. If you think about that novel at the very end of the excerpt that people got, which I think was supposed to be earlier on in the novel as well, that ends with Sylvanas thinking, okay, I'm going to attack Stormwind, which certainly a pretty big ballsy move, but as is quite clear so far in Battle for Azeroth, that doesn't actually happen. So the events, the unfolding of this war, we don't really know how it goes down. Therefore, there is narrative room for it to make sense. Christy Golden is quite a good writer, so there's a very good chance that she will be able to make that be somewhat actually sensible, especially since when it comes to characters like Anduin, Jaina, Sylvanas, she's already written them before, and she's written them, well, far better than they're being wrote in-game. I would definitely hope that she is on board for at least guiding the narrative content of this expansion, not from a game designer perspective, but, there as a narrative consultant to help actually shape that war campaign to make sure that it doesn't end up like a bit of a mangled mess. So I think that's my broad thoughts on the whole Alliance versus Horde war thing, or at least the sort of explanation behind it. Basically, I don't think that the war will be as much of a prominent feature as what we perhaps see in something like that opening cinematic. Looking at the island expeditions, yeah, you fight some special forces of the other faction, but that makes reasonable sense. That's the level of skirmishing that we've seen between the factions throughout all of the game. And then, of course, the Warfronts, they are going to be that big feature that brings the war to life. Again, we don't really know how they're actually going to play out, because that's one of the systems that they talked about, but not really in a massive amount of detail. Now, of course, personally, as you know, I have liked the idea of an Alliance versus Horde war. For me, it sort of resembles going back to basics in some ways. And I know that for a lot, they'll think about, well, Legion happened, all these big expansions have happened that have maybe taken us past that stage. Well, I'm actually okay with some degree of narrative reset, because as much as I think their lore is quite cool, Blizzard's storytelling is not something that I really feel that attached to, because I think it's probably the thing that they're worst at as a company, and one of my hopes is that with an expansion like this, they will do a better job with that. Alex Afrasabi was talking about the characters that they want to focus on in this expansion. He was talking about how they want to start doing more characterful stories, and I think that a theme which is more focused around personal conflict and stuff like that is something that could actually bring the characters to life a bit better. Going back to, say, Legion, I think really the only Legion cinematic that worked for me was perhaps the Stormheim one, because there were some very clearly set up character motivations. You knew what was going on. Now, it is the case they sort of dropped the ball in the rest of that storyline, but if we can have more moments like that where people can rally behind these characters, I think that could be pretty damn motivating for the expansion. And of course, if you're someone who's not super into the Alliance versus Horde theme, I get you, I understand why, and I have got to imagine that the final raid boss of this is not going to be the opposite faction leader or anything like that. It could be a Shara, it could be some sort of old god thing. I'm quite sure, based on what they've said at BlizzCon, that, yep, there's this big war going on, and stuff is sort of happening, happening in the shadows. I'd imagine in a major patch of this expansion, shit will get real, right? There'll be some invasion from the seas with the Naga and Ashara, something along those lines. So they're pretty much my thoughts on the story for the most part. Let's talk about the features though. So, first of all, 2 continents. Technically, that is more than we've seen before. Now that, of course, only is 6 zones, which, okay, I say only, it's more than what Legion shipped with. I think 6 zones is fair enough. What's interesting, though, is that for each one of the factions, you only have core level up content in your own continent, which means we get 3 zones each. Does that mean that the leveling content is going to be a bit faster? Or does it mean that stuff like, say, the war campaign is actually quite a beefy amount of content that's pretty much worth, a zone of, say, quest experience, and therefore is stuff that will last for quite a long time? Is the war campaign something that could actually stand up alongside, say, some of those Suramar long-term bits of quest content? Now then, of course, once you hit max level, you get to experience the other side's continent in a more full manner. Of course, I think that's very good, and by the time that we are all level 120, we'll actually have a pretty damn big world to explore. Of course, it still has to be seen whether this will be larger than Legion or anything like that, but so far it seems like, actually, yeah, there could be a larger world than what Legion had, and I think that's definitely a good thing. Now, they also talked about world quests. This was one area of disappointment for me with this expansion. It seems like world quests are very much just being moved over in quite a traditional manner. For me, with the world quests, like Guild Wars 2 beat World of Warcraft world quests before the world quests existed, so what Guild Wars 2 shipped with in 2012, I believe, is still more advanced than what World of Warcraft does in 2017, presumably then in 2018 with the world quest system. So I think they really have, I would like to see a lot more there. Hopefully when we actually see this on alpha and beta, we start to see more dynamic world quest stuff that really embraces this being a multiplayer game instead of, everyone just auto group finds and it's a bit, sort of you wipe the map pool of static content and wait for it to respawn. So that was a little bit of a disappointment for me. Now moving on to the other core content. There's raids, there's dungeons, these things are both great, there's Mythic Plus, so that's another brilliant thing. They're also going to be focusing, or at least they said now that Mythic Plus has been so successful, more of the dungeons in the game will be built with that in mind. that has me extremely excited. And on the topic of dungeons, we were going through a lot of the gameplay footage from the con, and we saw that in the Freehold dungeon, there's a section where you can kind of pledge allegiance to one of the 3 different groups in Freehold. Freehold is basically this like outlaw, vagabond kind of city, so depending on what you do there, you get different routes through the dungeon. I think that's a pretty cool idea, so maybe we're going to be seeing more interactive dungeons. There could be some more inspiration from stuff like, say, the Court of Stars, which I think would be pretty cool. You know, it would have to be done in, in moderation. Not everything can be full of Court of Stars-like challenges, but yeah, I think dungeon raid content probably looking quite good if it's going to be following the Legion model. Now, in terms of the other stuff, of course, Island Expeditions, I think these could be really major. Now, here's the thing, a lot of the comments, right, sort of just said, oh, so it's just mop scenarios, but randomized. The thing with the mop scenarios is their gameplay was vapid. That was their major problem. They also weren't that repeatable because, well, they were the same every time. So if these can actually feel different every time, and based on what the devs said they wanted to do at that panel, I do think they will mostly feel different every time, especially if you're on a mythic difficulty, because if you think about it, right, a mythic difficulty dungeon, or a mythic plus, it's, depending, okay, of course, in your keystone fixes, it's the same every time. But if you have a bunch of objectives on an island laid out in a different order every time that you go there, then the dynamic strategies that you make up, they will actually make it feel repeatable. So I think that's pretty good. This whole enemy AI thing, once again, I think that's extremely good as well. So, assuming those things come together and live up to the developers' promise, or at least their hopes, of course, I think it could be a very, very cool bit of content. And what interests me about it the most is it is expanding the breadth of the end game of World of Warcraft in a way that's kind of interesting in a time-accessible manner. You've probably heard me say quite a few times, I think that challenging but time-accessible content is something that's very good for the game. Now, for me, this extends into loads of different things. I would like difficult stuff like Sartharian 3D, Sartharian 1D or 2D, or even just little, sub-raids like Sartharian. I would love those to be in the game because they are tuned around a set amount of players, or at least, they've been the current, raid system. So they're good quality content, but you can sort of get into them quite quickly. So what I love about these island expeditions is, even if you do not have much time in the day and you want to play some World of Warcraft, you want it to be a good difficulty and be engaging, it seems like this system is going to actually do that for you. And I think that's great because with World of Warcraft, it's one of those things like when you log on and maybe there's not enough of your friends on to do a raid or something like that, those sort of more accessible bits of content that are time accessible but still challenging bits of content, they are the things that will keep you being able to play the game day in, day out. If you look back at Warlords of Draenor, sure, its raids were great. There was a lot of people in Warlords who would log in only for raids. The expansion still suffered greatly because there wasn't that much stuff to do in between the raids, and I think one thing WoW's typically struggled with is how do you sort of balance out the rest of the gameplay. It seems like this system is pretty much aimed at doing that. I think it's a very good goal, and again, like if this was to go down well in this expansion, I'd be interested to see what it would mean for the future. Now, as a slight side topic for this, there's the new AI. Now, if this AI actually lives up to that promise, it could be used in so many different ways that would be pretty damn cool. They've said already that it's only being used in Warfronts and in the Island Expeditions. I think that's great. That's probably where you want that to live for now. I would be very interested to see what else that could do. I don't know, like even imagine a battleground where you've got like this neutral but hostile to both factions, super intelligent group of like 3 NPCs who are, trying to mess everyone up. Okay, that's probably a terrible idea for balance. I don't know, like even in AV, the 2 runner NPCs, like that you could do for an objective way back, imagine if they were like smart in some way. I don't know. Just having access to new AI to allow them to do new things, I think that could be quite interesting indeed. Of course, a lot of people talk about how great their AI is, and then it's really not that great, so once again, we do have to wait and see. Now, this does also bring me onto the topic of Warfronts. They sort of said that Warfronts are, right, basically they didn't want to say that they're event-based, like something like, say, Time Walking, but they sort of said that they wouldn't be available all the time. And one of their ideas with the system is you could do it a few times for sort of a lot of one-off-ish rewards, but if you wanted to keep on doing Warfronts, you could still keep on doing them. So, it definitely says to me that it's an exciting bit of content, or they want it to be an exciting bit of content that feels new, feels different, feels fresh, but that it is something that kind of isn't extremely core to the gameplay of the overall expansion. Now, they also did say that it could affect areas, so they, like the first one's in Stromgarde, right? It seemed to be that it was implied that if a faction, I don't know if it could be the case that, say, the Warfront event is on for a certain amount of time, and whichever faction overall wins the most, there is for the next 2 weeks, like that zone is in a different phase to reflect that. Not 100% sure, and then maybe the next time Warfronts roll around, if the Alliance won the offensive 2 weeks ago, then the Alliance are defending, and it's almost like a Winter Grasp situation. Not 100% sure there. There's definitely some room for that to be a very interesting feature. A part of me, so here, alright, I'm actually conflicted in this, because the fantasy of it, I'm 100% down on. I think that's great, or down for even. The thing that worries me is the literal implementation and how they can make that be fun. Especially since it's 20 players. So I almost would have thought that's maybe something you would do maybe 5 or 6 players, so you could all be on Discord coordinating your troops together or something like that. But 20 players is quite a lot. So yeah, I'll need to wait and see if there's actually a good degree of fun in that bit of content. But certainly the fantasy of it is something that I think is quite great. Now then, there's all of the systems changes. So first of all, on the topic of classes, I'm pretty damn glad that we're not seeing just reworks all over the show. That wouldn't be great. We've already seen, like, Warlords had loads of reworks. Legion then had loads of reworks. And for another expansion to do that again, I think that would be a problem. Like, Blizzard have multiple times said that one of the top reasons that people end up leaving the game is stuff like major class changes that make it no longer sort of fun for the people who had already attached to a given class. So yeah, definitely a good thing that they are going to be focusing and refining on what they currently have, even though that does mean, unfortunately for myself, that Ret Paladins are not going to change, so I probably won't be playing one of those Lightforged Draenei Paladins anytime soon. But I think it's a pretty good goal. Now, in terms of integrating the good parts of artifacts into the classes where it makes sense, I think that also is a very good goal. They said their philosophy is essentially to, take the artifacts off, see how the class plays. If the class is fun, then maybe they can build on it from there. If they feel like one of those artifact traits really was core to the class, they might put it into a talent or bake it in. Or if they feel like, okay, the class is fun, it's got some problems, those problems were solved by an artifact trait, but let's try solving it with something else, a different type of effect. And it seems to be more that level of tweaks that they're doing, so I suppose I'm actually particularly interested to see how they deal with Roll the Bones and Outlaw Rogues. That's certainly one thing. And also Survival Hunters. I'm assuming Survival is going to stay and not be turned into a ranged spec again, so we'll have to see what's going on there, because the Survival Hunter, number of people playing it, certainly does not seem to be that massive, even though the spec certainly has, I think, increased in fun as we've got more gear. And of course, when we're talking about classes, that does obviously bring me on to Azerite gear, Artifacts 2.0, the death of legendaries, the rise of Azerite, Heart of Azeroth, all that stuff. Overall, I think it's good. Now, I know that a lot of people want Titanforge to be wholesale ripped out of the game. I can get on board in parts with that, certainly, but that's just not what they're going to do, so we're going to have to live with whatever comes. What I am happy with is that they seem to be trying to just maybe tone down or refine the frequency and range of Titanforging, so I guess that's good. Then for the Azerite gear, I'm super happy that that's not on the Titanforging system. I like how you can just focus on getting your bits of Azerite gear that you really want from the hardest difficulty bit of content that you can do. That's something that will encourage people to try harder difficulty stuff. So maybe if you are a normal raider, okay, and you're just going through all the normals, and in Legion you were going through the normals and thinking, haha, I'm going to get a Titanforge up to heroic level, isn't that great? Well, for that Azerite gear, you're going to be thinking, maybe I should try the harder mode so that I can actually get that really cool bit of Azerite gear that I really want. I think that's a good thing for the game, and it's good for, its incentive systems and all that. I don't see as many problems with the overall Heart of Azeroth / Azerite system as I did with the Artifacts one, especially because Artifacts, Artifact knowledge, if you end up having billions of a number, and that number started off in the tens, you've probably messed something up down the road, so definitely glad that that's going to be working in a different way. It seems like the catch-up systems and all that will be a lot easier for them to implement, and I'm glad there's no spec-specific stuff. It's just on your character for your class. Great. No more having to swap around our different artifact weapons. I guess on the topic of weapons, it is nice that we'll be getting new, fresh weapon models. Just, you know, pick up a sword this time around. That'll be great. You know, it's weird, for some reason, just there was no swords in the Broken Isles at all. But yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with those systems. The thing, though, is we do need to wait and see what they're actually going to be like, because, yeah, the devil's in the details is definitely what I'd say. Now, in terms of other features, we've got allied races and leveling. Definitely I want to cover this stuff. So I think leveling's a massive problem in World of Warcraft, because you can't really, well, you can't grow a game if your initial gameplay experience of it is shit. World of Warcraft's is that. It's terrible. World of Warcraft does not look favorable in comparison to most stuff when you just jump into it now on a new character. It's basically broken, if that would be my appraisal of the situation. Now, I, of course, want to be very clear that I'm talking about the gameplay systems, right? The out-leveling zones, the whacking every mob to death in one strike, and all that stuff. There is still a world there that's interesting, there's still stories that people enjoy, there's still the exploration and the RP and all that stuff that does still work. But the core gameplay has really suffered as time has went on. So them trying to fix that, I think, is absolutely fantastic. Then as we go into the expansions, consolidating their level brackets, so say Northrend and Outland are both 60 to 80, and then Mop and Kata are both 80 to 90, I believe. I think that's great. That just helps to consolidate the content, gives you more freedom. Also, it means for the different queues and all of that stuff, you know, the brackets will be larger because there'll be scaling, which means the queues should be a lot shorter. It also means you will be running more Gnomeregan, potentially, which is not good. I don't like Gnomeregan, but hey, it comes with the territory. Overall, extremely excited about that. And one thing that I really want to try is making, you know, that I've done those like projects, like little add-on compilations and stuff to try to make World of Warcraft a bit more action-y and fun to play as a sort of single-player RPG while you're leveling up. I will definitely be doing V2 of that in preparation for all of this leveling stuff. I'd love it if I could just, like, have this add-on pack that I could either upload somewhere or, you know, make one of those curated ones that people could download and install it, use it in a character, and find, oh wow, World of Warcraft's got an immersive camera, the controls feel better, you know, and it's like a fun way to level up a new character, or maybe even to experience the Battle for Azeroth actual leveling process. So that's certainly something I'll be doing. Now, as for the allied races, it's, you know, there has been a little bit of criticism for them. Now, that video, by the way, exploded, so people are super excited about the idea of at least the core fantasy of playing as these different races. I know there's some people who are a bit confused about, like, the Blood Elves getting exiled for using Void, Illyria convincing them to join the Alliance, / the Nightborn going over to the Horde. For now, I'm just going to assume that Blizzard satisfactorily manages to cover that, or at least lampshade it with the in-game story. So then I think the other thing is a lot of people have sort of thought, okay, you could just do this with like a skin tint option or, you know, another cosmetic option in the character creation menu. So I think it's interesting then how Blizzard's been able to take not a massive amount of new resources when you think about it, and put them in a different menu, give them some quests, give it some, you know, unique stuff for the heritage armor, and actually turn a sort of smallish amount of customization options into something that really, at least in the value that people perceive from it, is like a new sort of, really a big new thing. I suppose the idea of, you know, leveling up a Lightforged Draenei, even though it is just a regular Draenei with a few shiny bits, that's decently compelling to people. So it's interesting they've been able to pull that off. Overall, though, I think it's a very sensible, good new system, and I'd love to see more races be added to it, especially just the more sort of interesting out there ones. We'll have to see what they would plan to add over time. There's a lot of candidates when you think about it. All the people we've quested with as the games went on, they could maybe even add a neutral allied race, and you could just be a member of that race and choose between Alliance and Horde. I think that would be very sensible, and that would help them add in a bunch of new allied races if they really wanted to do that. So overall, I think pretty good system, and it was sensible of Blizzard from at least a business and hype perspective to have that be one of the front and center announcements, because one thing I've really learned doing YouTube all this time is, and yeah, I know it for myself as well, people love visual stuff. Like, you can just see it with your eyes and immediately engage with it, and that seems to have drummed up a lot of excitement for the expansion. Actually, I almost forgot about world PvP, so wow, I'm actually really excited for this. Okay, here's the deal with me and PvP. I think PvP is, you know, it's cool, it's fun, I like how it's time accessible, yet challenging. I don't, you know, I think that, like, WoW PvP is very engaging if you're into it, and very unengaging if you're not into it, because a lot of it sort of depends on you just having a understanding of sort of all these little mechanics that aren't super visual. That said, the idea of world PvP, done right, I'm really excited. Now, a lot of people in my video said, oh, so they're just killing PvP servers. No, they're not. They're not at all. So, modern World of Warcraft servers matter less and less. If you go into, like, a certain zone, it'll be populated with people from other servers, and they try to load balance all of that so that it kind of works. If you, say, go to Stormwind, and you opt into PvP, you're phased into a completely different version of WoW. A completely different version, like the world PvP version. It's like sort of seamlessly traveling over to a PvP server. And the reason why that's done in a city like Stormwind is because they don't want you to just be like, oh, I want to pull noobs now, turn on PvP mode when you're in the middle of a quest. No, they want it to be a conscious thing where you go back to Stormwind, you go back to Orgrimmar, you turn on PvP mode, and then when you leave, you're in PvP land. And it, you know, there's actually just the solid basis for world PvP to happen. Now, they're also doing some scaling stuff to sort of manage the power deltas between people. Hopefully that's all going to be applied in a reasonable manner, of course. But if world PvP is something that can actually be good at a baseline system, what excites me is how they could add to that, because there's a lot of games which have a world, they have PvP, and then they have certain systems which will naturally compel people to action. Think of EVE Online, okay? So the developers at CCP, they do not add massive amounts of new content per se. There's not like new dungeons and raids coming in all the time, but they have these systems developed which just encourages people to naturally engage with each other. So what's interesting for me with a world PvP thing is, you know, there's, say, let's just say the Warden Towers, okay? On a PvE version, when you're phased into PvE mode, sure, it's just a normal Warden Tower, but in PvP mode, it's something that people can capture, and maybe when you capture it, it's yours, guaranteed for like an hour, and then it's unlockable again, or, you know, you can fight over it again the next hour or two. And with a system like that, you could just have, like, this sort of weird dynamic war going on across all of Azeroth, right? All the Eastern Kingdoms, all of Kalimdor, you could have this, like, proper fucking war going on. It would be really damn cool, especially if they then had reward systems that worked for world PvP. Maybe you could do it so that, and again, this is not something that's been announced, this is just me having ideas, but maybe they could sort of have a dual system. You've got your, like, ranked honor and all that stuff. Maybe there could be something which tracks, like, your, you know, your world PvP kills, and you could get a unique title for that, and that could be, like, a side part of the game that a lot of people would probably enjoy. So yeah, that whole world PvP thing, pretty damn excited about. As for the Battleground and the other stuff, well, you know, it's been, what, 4.5 years since we last got a Battleground, so sure, I'm happy to see one. Obviously, we're going to need to see more as time goes on, because one Battleground every 4 years is not particularly great, Blizzard. But at least there is some new stuff for the PvP players. Certainly in the topic of gearing and all that, I'm glad the Legion complete random systems being, I assume, thrown in the bin. They did say that there will be or at least currently the plan is for there to be PvP vendors in the sort of arena area of Borealis and Zuldazar, the Zandalari city. So that should be good for the PvP players. Once again, though, we will need to wait and see. And I suppose I want to end this video talking about some of the, I guess, lore, story, future stuff, a bit of speculation, and what I think this could mean for the game. So, I think this overall is a little bit of a narrative reset. If you think about stuff like, say, Vanilla, you know, there was no clear story in Vanilla. It was just, there's the world, I guess there's a bit of a faction war going on, there's some tensions. Oh, by the way, there's also a random dragon here and a dragon there and stuff going on. Yes, there was lore, but it wasn't sort of unified under, oh, there's one big bad in the sky and he doesn't like you. Onwards to Legion, of course, we have Sargeras, and, well, okay, you know, the whole Argus situation, right? I don't want to get into the Antorus raid events, but suffice to say, at the end of World of Warcraft Legion, the Legion thing is less of a thing. I think that's pretty obvious to everyone. They're sort of big space stories, right? They're like, even say Cataclysm. Big existential crisis. yet that's probably the expansion where they really messed up a lot of story. That's not to say, of course, TBC is probably the most legendarily retconny, lore-destroying sort of thing, but, you know, Cataclysm was pretty weak in terms of the story. In fact, I'd say the best storytelling, even though a lot of people did not like the theme, is probably Mists of Pandaria. Warlords also tried to do some cool narrative stuff with having characters, following a cast of characters as if it was something, you know, a campaign that people had actually planned you to sort of go through, which was interesting. Then Legion, you know, I thought it was a little bit messy with characters, you know, had some good wins, had some losses, but I think that by doing a narrative reset, and, you know, if they're going to be, say, going into the character of Anduin and properly following him through an expansion, doing the same for Sylvanas and all the other crew that we know, I think that could be properly a lot more interesting and could actually help Blizzard to develop new characters who will sort of really last into the future. Because there's a lot of people like Varian who are, say, holdovers. I'm interested to see what they kind of do with, like, the new generation of characters. Certainly with Jaina, she's taken so much of a break that now that she's coming back, and according to Afrasabi, we're properly delving into her story, you know, dealing with regret from all of her past actions, or maybe things she didn't do and think she should have done now. That could be quite good. So by doing this sort of narrative reset, we get to spend time with these characters, see how all of that unfolds, and then bubbling underneath the surface is all the threats that we know about. All of those, you know, whisperings that we've had over, say, Legion in the past expansions. So we know we're going to be dealing with Ashara. We know the prison of N'Zoth is sort of weakening. We know there's the Void stuff going on, right? All of these things are sort of bubbling and simmering there. I'm kind of happy that we're not just going immediately from Argus and sort of hopping right into, oh, we're going to lop the head off Ashara, then we're going to lop the head off N'Zoth, and then we're going to go to space, and we're going to lop the head off old elder god, like, Lovecraft thing, and then we don't know what to do in terms of story because we've just killed all of our villains. So let's go and do time travel orcs again. I think World of Warcraft in recent times had some of these inherent plot problems where you're just dealing with all the big villains, and that's even with you doing a Panda expansion, followed by a time-traveling orc expansion, and then following that up by basically defeating the core enemy of the whole universe, at least the initially established universe. And yeah, unless they, like, start bringing in the light and stuff like that, I almost feel like we do need an expansion's worth of time of dealing with sort of Azerothian affairs until stuff sort of gets big again. And I think it is a bit of a change of pace, a bit of fresh air, something that will feel different to the previous expansion. Because I feel like if we did a full expansion of killing the Legion, and then a full expansion of killing the Void, what would happen is you've got two expansions which feel the same, but, you know, a different sort of tint, right? Oh, this time it's Void, that time it was Legion, but it still sort of feels similar. I think that if we do one Legion expansion, which we're at the end of now, and then do something that feels different, then by the next time we go and deal with some big existential crisis, it will sort of feel different from where we came from, and that should make that eventual expansion, be it the Dark Below or Tides of Vengeance or any of that, I think that will actually make that expansion more interesting. Then, I guess there were all of the speculations and all the stuff that I was talking about, so kind of interestingly enough, what ended up coming true were some of my hopes, my wishes about there being an Alliance Horde conflict going back to basics. That came true, and then a lot of the, a lot of the hints, a lot of the, Lord of Ravens will turn the key, 5 torches to light our path, that stuff hasn't actually came to pass. Now, I did see a very interesting comment that, with Teldrassil burning, that could be one of the torches to light their path, because every time the Night Elves plant a World Tree, it kind of ends in a little bit of disaster, though in some cases you do need to dive a little bit more into the deeper sort of lore to get a lot of that story. But it's clear then that all the Void chatter, all of the old god stuff, that's not 8.0. It could be 8.2, it could be 8.3 or 8.4, or it could be 9.0. We don't exactly know. But it's interesting, of course, that they're thinking a few expansions ahead with this stuff. That, at least to me, would say that it's very likely that we are going to be dealing with a big bad existential crisis, probably the expansion after Battle for Azeroth. I suppose then one other interesting thing, if it's called Battle for Azeroth, how are we actually going to end it? Like, what's the state of the lore going to be like? What will happen to the Undercity? What will happen to Teldrassil? There's a lot of pretty interesting stories for them to follow here. And another thing just about that faction conflict, actually, I think it was in the Q&A. Someone said, hey, what about us doing a raid like that was against the opposite faction? And the WoW devs didn't reject it out of hand. They said, oh yeah, that would be pretty cool. We see no reason why, you know, leader from the other faction couldn't be a raid boss. Now, I said leader, you know, a member of the other faction couldn't be a raid boss. I thought that was interesting. The only thing that, of course, would be a little bit worrisome for me is if we start to kill off major characters and, you know, major sort of faction characters in a raid. I think that'll be a bit strange. But, yeah, it's just plotting the overall tone of this expansion is certainly an interesting one. Though I do implore you to watch my video covering the story, the continent, and the zones, because I think after watching that video, you'll see that this is not going to be 2 years of extrapolating upon the launch, or the reveal cinematic for Battle for Azeroth. Then another thing to talk about, actually, is the aesthetics of this expansion, and the zones, what they actually look like. Gotta say, I was very damn impressed with the art assets that they showed off. First of all, it's kind of cool seeing more stylized humans, even though there is one particular human screenshot where, well, that hand placement is certainly a little bit unfortunate for the guy. But still, I think the sort of the art style there in the humans is pretty cool. Now, with kul'tiras, I'm actually a little bit disappointed in the color tones of some of the buildings. Seem a little bit drab and dull, which I'm not 100% in on. But then looking at Stormsong Valley, holy shit, that looks absolutely gorgeous. As for the Zandalari stuff, well, I love the look of that architecture anyway, so I'm very much down for that. I like how they're getting a lush jungle, they're getting a desert, they're getting a dense swamp. It seems like there's a lot of varied stuff there. And once we actually hit endgame, that means we're going to be, you know, 6 different zones, and they all seem to be pretty damn, you know, unique. And as so far as, like, the actual landscapes and stuff that we saw, looking pretty good. There is some dense stuff, which I know that's been a topic of a little bit of criticism with the Legion world design. There were also some zones, though, that seemed to have big, wide open hills. You had places like Stormsong Valley, you had stuff like the Desert Zone. So it seems like a pretty varied world overall, and just the general sort of theme of all that stuff, the trolls, and then, of course, the humans. Yeah, I'm down with it. I think it seems like a pretty damn cool world for us to be exploring. We've seen a lot of, you know, the elves, we've seen a lot of the Stormheim stuff. This actually seems like it could feel like something a little bit different. Plus, I'm actually just happy that we're getting a desert again. A desert and a jungle. It's been a little while since those. So, yeah, the actual core look of that, I'm pretty damn happy with. And once again, hopefully those island expeditions actually do get to bring us to diverse locales. So we've got the one place, which is like a lost Gilnean settlement. That's pretty cool. We've got another one, which is basically using the Lost Isles tile set. I'd be interested to see what else we could sort of get out of a system like that. They've only shown 2 of the islands. We don't know how many there will be. But, yeah, overall, the visuals, they seem quite varied. One thing, I suppose, that does interest me while I'm on the topic of things being visually varied is how much will we actually be going to, well, Azeroth? Because when you say Azeroth and the expansion's called Battle for Azeroth, do you necessarily think of just kul'tiras and Zandalar? No, you don't. I'm interested to see if they're going to find a reason for players to actually go back to some of the old zones. They didn't really give any details there, so we're going to need to wait and see, but I certainly do think it would be a little bit of a missed opportunity if they are going to be revamping the modern-day story of all these continents, but not really have players, you know, any sort of reason to actually go to them and explore that and see what that story is. So, yeah, there you go. That pretty much is my thoughts on this expansion. I guess the core message is, I understand why some people were a little bit underwhelmed or are not completely on board with at least what was sort of shown off in the trailer. For me, I thought that trailer was basically the best one they've made. I loved it. I thought just the whole faction conflict is right up my alley. I think it can give us some cool character stories, really good twists, plot developments, all that fun stuff. And Christy Golden is on board to help guide the story, presumably, and I think she's pretty great. So that should be good. Overall, basically, I'm very excited. Also, classic servers. I'm extremely excited about those. And doing YouTube, this sort of means that if there's a bit of a lull in live, maybe there's something going on in classic servers, right? Or, you know, maybe I play some classic and I'm like, okay, I've had enough of this for this month. I can hop back to the live game. I think that should mean that, you know, if I'm feeling bored of playing the current game at the minute, I can hop onto another one, and it's still World of Warcraft. It's still something that's pretty cool. So I'm just really excited. To be honest, it really was the strongest BlizzCon for me, I think. Like, I'm really impressed. The only criticism I would say is they were a little bit sparse on some of the systems details. I know that a lot of, like, the Mythic Raiders, like I saw Roger Brown tweet, saw Exorcist tweet, that they were pretty underwhelmed with the BlizzCon showing for this expansion. And I get that. I think that's information we will eventually get. So for me, it's a bit too early to judge on that, but I do understand it, I suppose. But yeah, that was quite a long video. It kind of flew by, though. I'm actually a bit scared. Wow. Okay, I've been recording for 45 minutes. That's interesting. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you've somehow managed to make it this far, if you want to catch up on all the Battle for Azeroth stuff and, all those memes about me not sleeping, you can check out the playlist. It's a pretty fun playlist, but yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.